In this lesson, we're going to explore how we can apply effects to our terrain in the terrain editor. Alright, so let's open up our terrain editor one more time. And in the terrain editor, let's actually turn off that altitude constraint. Inside of the terrain editor, we have the effects panel here. And actually we have zones and effects. And I'll talk about zones a little bit later in this lesson. But let's go through our effects here. So we have two different types of effects. We have erosion effects and we have global effects. The first thing that we need to determine whenever trying to create some erosion effects is the rock hardness. So is this pure stone or is it made of soil? Or is it kind of a mixture of both? If it's pure stone, we want it to be really, really hard, and that's going to affect how this is eroded. Now if it's really soft, if it's made up of completely soil, we want that to be a little more on the soft side. Now I'm going to make this kind of just less than half here, and let's apply an erosion effect. So let's do something like, let's do dissolve. Now when we click on that, you'll see that it's applied an effect, but it's really hard to see. And that's because we really haven't given it enough iteration to see that. So I'm going to hit Control Z or undo one time and just wait for that to finish there. And let's right click on this dissolve and you'll see that we have this iteration. Let's take our iteration amount up and let's go to about 20 for right now, and then we'll hit OK. Now you'll wait for that to apply that effect there. Give it just a moment and be patient with it, because it does take just a couple of minutes to apply that. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and wait for that. Now with this effect applied, you can see these cracks that have been created in our scene here. So this is starting to get into a little bit more detailed terrain. So this is a really neat way to create some of those finer details. Now you can mess around with all of these different erosion effects, and you need to experiment with the rock hardness as well as the iteration amount. Now let's go to this global effect. Now the global effect is going to apply this to everything over the entire terrain at the same level. All right, so if we wanted to create something like, let's say, cracks over this entire surface, we would do the exact same thing as we did before. We'd right click on it to determine our iteration count, and then we would hit OK. It's going to apply that effect, and you'll see that that iteration amount was just a little bit too high. So now it looks like we have a field of stalagmites. Okay. So let's hit Control Z one time and wait for that to reduce, and then we're going to right click on cracks again, and then we'll take that iteration amount down to about 5. And you'll see how this applies that, and still that looks like it might be a little bit too much. So again, you can always undo it. Just give it a couple of seconds to revert back. Right click to set your iteration amount. Let's go to 2, and you'll see how this just applies kind of a pitting along our terrain. Now if this is not something that you really desire, you can always hit undo and try something a little bit different. Now these effects are applied the exact same way as anything else. It just depends on your rock hardness and then how much iteration you're applying to that. Alright, so now in this lesson I also want to get into how we can use zones in our terrains. Now zones is going to be very, very helpful for us whenever we're trying to work in specific areas. So if I come over the top of my terrain here and I go to my zones panel, I can create a new zone. So right now our zone is the entire terrain. So if I want to add a zone, you'll see it kind of turns this red, and then I can basically drag an area and that creates a zone. So now I can come in here and just start to work on this specific area and not have to worry about the rest at this point. Now we can rename this to anything that we want. We can call this zone underscore 01, and then we can view zones and we can create a new one. So let's add another zone in here. Let's say we wanted to work on this area, and then we'll call this zone underscore 02. So now this just really allows me to get in and start working on some of the different details on this specific area, so I can really get into some of that painting. Okay, so if I want, I can come into my 3D sculpt and just really get in there, take that size down, and just really start to sculpt that. Okay. Now I'm just going to hit Control Z a couple of times to get rid of that sculpting there. I don't really want that. But you can see how zones are really, really helpful. All right. So in this lesson, we've taken a look at effects and zones and how we can apply cracks and things like that, and then how we can use zones to really focus in on specific areas. All right. So this is going to wrap up our course here, and we've covered a lot in the terrain editor. That was the main focus of this entire course here. We've gone through and talked about all of the different types of terrains that we can create, the differences between standard and procedural terrains, and how they can help us in different situations, how we can control those terrains to be able to create hyper-realistic environments. We've gone in through the terrain editor and we've discussed pretty much every section in moderate detail. We haven't got into every specific tool, but that's not really the focus of this course here. So you should have a pretty good idea of how to begin using the terrain editor and how to experiment with it and begin creating some of your really nice hyper-realistic terrains. So I hope you guys had fun during this course. I hope you learned a lot, and I'll see you guys next time.